Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome to the School of Personal Finance. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a backdoor Roth IRA. So I'm going to explain exactly what it is, why you would want to do it, the steps in order to complete it, and the pitfalls that you have to watch out for when you're implementing it. All right, let's get to it. So if this is your first time here, welcome. I put out a new video each week all about different personal finance topics. But if you've been watching my content for a while, then you know that I'm a big fan of the Roth IRA. I did a video a little over a year and a half ago about how much I love my Roth IRA, where I talked about my relationship with it through the years. I did a video called The Ultimate Guide to Roth Conversions, talking about how to convert your traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. And I also made a video on the comparisons between choosing a Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA. But now in this video, I'm going to talk about the backdoor Roth IRA strategy. And now if you've never heard of this before, you don't know what it is, I think the best place for us to start is to talk about who would actually want to do this. So this is a strategy for people who cannot make normal Roth IRA contributions because they make too much money. So with a Roth IRA, the IRS has income limits. They say, you know what, if you make over this amount of money, then you do not qualify for a Roth IRA. So the backdoor strategy is directly for those people who cannot make a regular Roth contribution because their income limits are too high. And now a few weeks ago, I also made a video on the income limits to be able to contribute to a deductible traditional IRA and also to be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. So real quick, I'll pull up those income limits for a Roth IRA and show them to you here. So if you are single, if you make below $124,000 a year, then you don't need to do a backdoor Roth IRA. You could just contribute to a Roth IRA and you're good to go. But now if you make over $124,000 but less than $139,000, then you start to become phased out. So now you could still make a Roth contribution, but it's only going to be a partial contribution. And then once you make over $139,000 of modified adjusted gross income, then you cannot contribute to a Roth IRA. So this is where the backdoor strategy would apply to you. And now if you are married and you file joint and you make under $196,000, then you could just make a regular Roth IRA contribution, $6,000 for 2020 and 2021. And if you're married, you could do $6,000 and your spouse could also do $6,000. So if you're under $196,000, you don't need to worry about a backdoor Roth IRA. You could just do a regular Roth IRA contribution. Over $196,000 of modified adjusted gross income, but below $206,000, you could do a partial contribution to a Roth IRA. And then once you're over $206,000 of modified adjusted gross income, you no longer qualify to make a Roth IRA contribution. So this is where the backdoor Roth IRA strategy would come into play for you. So that covers who this would apply to for a backdoor Roth IRA. The question is, why would you really want to do it? And the answer to that is because Roth IRAs are great. So when you put money into a Roth IRA, you're putting after-tax contributions, so it's money that's in your checking account, you contribute it into your Roth IRA, and then the money grows tax-free forever. As long as you follow the withdrawal rules, when you take that out in retirement, that money is completely tax-free. And with all the uncertainty going on with the government and the debt and printing of money, having tax-free buckets of money in retirement, that sounds pretty appealing to me. So now, in order to really understand how this works, let's take a step back and talk about a traditional IRA. So many of you out there might have a traditional IRA. So that's an IRA where you make a contribution. Again, you can do up to $6,000 in 2020 or 2021, and you get a tax deduction in the year that you make the contribution as long as you qualify. So there are income limitations for this as well, and they're actually much lower than the Roth. But here's a key point to understand. You are able to make a contribution to a traditional IRA no matter how much income you make. So you could make $1 million a year and you could still make that $6,000 contribution to a traditional IRA. The trick is you can't take a tax deduction for it. So you could put the $6,000 in there, you just can't write it off on your taxes. The reason people would do this is if they want the tax deferred growth. So if you put $6,000 in there and then the money grows in there for the next 30 years, you're not paying any taxes on the interest, on the capital gains, the dividends. The money grows tax deferred. But then when you take it out, all the growth and all the dividends and everything, that becomes taxable when you take it out. The initial $6,000 that you put in there, because you weren't able to take a tax deduction up front, that would not be taxable when it comes out. That would be your cost basis. So now you have to elect this. There's a tax form in 8606 606 form that notifies the IRS that you are making a non-deductible contribution to your traditional IRA. Some people do use this strategy if they have no other options available to them and they want to save more money for retirement. But it's not the greatest thing in the world. So now, armed with that knowledge, let's talk about how we would do a backdoor Roth IRA. So if you make too much money, you can't contribute to the traditional and take a tax deduction. You can't contribute to the Roth because your income is above the limits. What you can do is you can make a non-deductible contribution to your traditional IRA. If you don't have one, you open one up, you drop $6,000 in there for 2020 or 2021, and then you could immediately convert it over to a Roth IRA. So this is the back door. You're contributing to a traditional and then you're converting over, you're going through the back door into your Roth IRA. And now that the money's in the Roth IRA, you're good to go. You've completed a backdoor Roth IRA contribution. All right, so let me just go over the steps up until this point. So step one is figure out, do I qualify for a Roth anyway? And I don't even have to worry about this backdoor nonsense. And if you do qualify, then great. Go contribute to a Roth IRA and max it out for 2020 up until April 15th. You could still do that. And then for 2021 as well. But now if you don't qualify, if your income, if you are priced out, if your income is above the limits, then step two is realize I can still get money into my Roth IRA through the back door. So what I need to do is I need to open up a traditional IRA, make a non-deductible contribution into my traditional IRA, and then immediately convert it over into my Roth IRA. And you know, the big brokerage places like Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, E-Trade, you could call them and they will help walk you through this. This is a very well-known strategy and it's completely on the up and up. It's a tax loophole. It's in the tax code. It's legal in order to do this. So you're not doing anything wrong by completing a backdoor Roth contribution. So you could call them up and they will walk you through it. But it's also very simple through the websites as well, just transferring from one to the other. But for your first time, I do recommend you call them and have them just walk you through the setup and everything. So now that you've moved the money, you've converted the traditional IRA over to the Roth IRA, you're done. You've made your backdoor Roth contribution. All right, so now let's talk about some pitfalls and some things that you really need to be aware of and understand before implementing this strategy. So the first one is that if you already have money in a traditional IRA that you have taken tax deductions on, then this becomes much more complicated. So say, for example, you had an old 401k at an old employer, and when you left, you rolled it over into an IRA, which is what many people do. So now to use easy numbers, let's say that you have an existing traditional IRA with $94,000 in it, and you go ahead and you make a $6,000 non-deductible contribution into it with the intent of converting that over into your Roth IRA to complete the backdoor Roth contribution. So after you make that $6,000 contribution, you now have $100,000 in that traditional IRA. $94,000 of it was pre-tax money, money that you rolled from an old 401k plan. So that money has never been taxed. And now you have this $6,000 of after-tax contributions. So you have $100,000 in this IRA, and only $6,000 of it is after tax. So that's only 6%. What the IRS says, this is called the Aggregate Rule or the pro rata rule, that you have to keep that percentage the same when converting over to a Roth IRA. So if there's $100,000 in there, 6,000 of it is after tax, that is 6%. If you go ahead and you convert $6,000 thinking, oh, this is all after tax money because I just put it in there. So now I'm going to take this $6,000 and go through the back door. On that $6,000, you have to apply that same percentage. So only 6% of that is going to be considered your after-tax contribution. The other 94% of it is going to be considered part of that pre-tax contribution that you will then have to pay taxes on in the year that you make the conversion. So it gets much more complicated and it reduces the benefit tremendously unless you want to convert money from your traditional to your Roth IRA. And that's a whole nother video and a whole nother discussion depending on your tax brackets and everything. But what you might do is unintentionally cause yourself a tax bill by converting, thinking that you're only converting this after-tax piece, when in reality, it's a very small percentage of the overall conversion that you're making, and you're gonna owe tax on the other amount. Now, one strategy, if you do find yourself in a situation where you have a large traditional IRA and you want to do a backdoor Roth conversion, is you take that traditional IRA and you roll it into your current employer's 401k plan. So 401k accounts, 403b accounts, they are not calculated in this aggregate pro rata rule when looking at doing backdoor Roth IRA conversions. So if you have that traditional IRA and you are able to roll it into your current employer's plan, what that does is that wipes out your IRA balances, and then you could go ahead and make that $6,000 non-deductible contribution, and that'll be 100% of all of your IRA money, and you could then go ahead and do the backdoor conversion. So that is one solution to getting around this pro rata rule, is just eliminating all the balances in your traditional IRA. I mean, another thing that you could do is look to convert the whole thing, but that's going to give you a very big tax bill depending on the size of your account in the year that you do the conversion. But again, depending on your tax bracket and your income, like in years of lower income where maybe you have a job change or something happens, you start your own business, those are great years to look at doing Roth conversions when you're in lower tax brackets. Again, that's a different video. Make sure to go check that one out. But these are just some strategies to think about if you are priced out of doing Roth contributions and you have this big traditional IRA. In order to be able to do it, you want to zero that thing out. You want to roll it into a 401k so that you are now opening the path to going through the back door. So if you have an existing traditional IRA or a simple IRA or a SEP IRA and you want to implement this, I would suggest getting some help from a professional, somebody who's done this 1,000 times, so that you make sure that you're calculating everything correctly. So now that really is the big pitfall that you need to watch out for. Another one is if you make the non-deductible contribution to the traditional IRA and then you wait a while before doing the conversion, what could happen is you could earn interest, whatever you invested in that traditional IRA, if it grows in value. So for example, let's say you make that $6,000 contribution and you invest in an S&P 500 index fund and you wait like 8 months before you do the conversion, that $6,000 could be worth $7,000. And now when you go to make the conversion through the back door, that $1,000 of gain, that is going to be taxable when you do the conversion. So the sooner you do the conversion, the simpler it is, because there shouldn't be any growth that you have to worry about paying taxes on in the conversion. All right, everyone, that is it for this one. I hope that you found that helpful. Please make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed this one. Hit that subscribe button if you are not subscribed to the channel yet, and I will see you again next week. Thanks.